Hello and welcome to Words Change Worlds 2 with Upwording. This is the second session that we run with Upwording as part of the International Festival of Consent, but we're recording this ahead of the festival. It's Sunday the 15th of November that the six of us are here in various parts of the world on the Zoom chat having the conversation that we're about to have. I'm Jenny Wilson. I'm one of the co-curators of the Festival of Consent, and I've been working with Upwording for some months now, learning these tools and techniques for exploring language together with some of the people who are here with me. And we are going to be talking about why, how and when to connect with the not like-minded. I'm going to introduce the first of our panelists today. That's Rivka Rubin. Hi, Rivka. Do you want to say hello?
I will. So hi. So I call myself Rivka Rubin, and generally what I do is I work with teams and organizations and individuals to assist them to actually lead lives they really enjoy leading and work with people in a non-hierarchical way that is stimulating and motivating, just to keep that one short. And again, the session that you're now hearing is the one after the one I will be doing on Friday. So it's quite funny to think of it that way. So you may well have heard it, or you might have listened to the audio. And what we will be doing here today is to bring some of Upwording to the fore, to see how that will impact on the very thinking that we may bring into a conversation like this one. And finally, just to say, Upwording came up around, well, in 2016, after several years of my involvement together with many other people in learning about how the way we speak and think impacts on our actions and on our way we are in the world with ourselves and each other. And specifically, what is it in I noticed that in our everyday use of language, we seem to be often contradicting ourselves and inadvertently upholding the very concepts that an increasing number of us in the world seek to dismantle without even noticing.
Thank you, Rivka. Charles, would you like to say a bit more?
Yeah, my name's Charles Lauder. I'm a film, TV and theatre director, and I engage with individuals and organisations in development, organisational and personal development. I usually synopsise by saying I seek to engage or challenge individuals and organisations to think differently. Often it's with a focus on equality and diversity and inclusion, specifically focused around race. What drew me to Upwording is I've always been intrigued by the impact and the importance of language. And so when Rivka first introduced me to the idea that was at that stage, I think, embryonic, what drew me to it was the idea that habitually we engage with words that imply or indeed sometimes explicitly demonstrate hierarchy, power, and a whole sense of the binary. You either agree or disagree. You're on this side or that side, rather than engaging with something that I adapted from when I was first working in television, which was the sense that the reason for knowing where peak white is and deep black is in order to play with all of what goes on in between. Whereas language seemed to be moving habitually to a position of taking only peak white or deep black positions. And so that was the real attraction for me, was then looking at how the power involved in taking those positions. So for example, when I say I must do something, I somehow seem to have given over the power for my choices and decision-making to some other higher power. And so that was what drew me to engaging with Rivka, and we've been on this journey of Upwording and acquiring like-minded folk as we went.
Thank you, Charles.
Nice. Hi, my name is Lou Drago. I'm based in Berlin, and I'm an artist, curator, writer, and a radio producer. I guess my fascination in language is multiple, but particularly interested in debinarizing our thinking through language, and the transformative and malleability also of language, the exciting new potential that comes from developing different ways of speaking. Particularly what both Rivka and Charles have touched on already about de-hierarchizing language. And yeah, and interested in how we can change the way that we speak with each other to be more inclusive, as opposed to kind of using the oppressor's tools and continuing to ostracize people through using exclusive language. I guess we'll go into that deeper in a sec.
Thank you. And Fee?
Hi, I'm Fee. I'm based in Salford. I work around how creative technology, or for the last 25 odd years, I've been working around how creative technology can support social justice movements. And as a neurodivergent person, I'm particularly obsessed at the moment by the pathologizing of our conditions, the fact that we're always termed as having deficits when actually our morals are far more highly formed than neurotypicals. I've started working with Rivka in the Upwording program for the last few months, and it's been such an excellent safe space to be able to speak our own truths, but also be empowered to reflect on those norms and keep that awareness that the language we use doesn't just reinform what we think about ourselves, but how we encourage others to maintain their own truths and their identities, and around the allyship movements as well. Yep, thanks.
Mariana?
Me, that's me. I'm Mariana Rentel. I'm from Argentina, currently living in Colombia. I live in Medellin, a very distinct city, very famous city, very stigmatized city. So it's very interesting for me to have an approach from an artistic point of view. I'm a visual artist and I'm also a professor there. So I have to, even though I speak the same language, I had to learn other codes. And I find it fascinating how actually through this, as Lou was saying, this malleability of language, how can we actually access other words? It's a very sci-fi thing if you kind of have the distinct eye. So I'm very excited for this conversation we're about to have.
And I noticed when Mariana was talking, she said that she has to. Part of our conversations together in Upwording are practicing some of the techniques of Upwording.
Yeah, but I did it intentionally because I think we've discussed this has, have, must as and I think I've put these words as actions. No, I think we talked about these verbs being a kind of a catapult, no, to move from one place to another, and we came to talk about these verbs as we don't use them correctly. We kind of stick with them. Well, this is what I propose during our practice. So I'm bringing them back as well here as catapults, as mediums, as triggers, no?
And can I add something to that? Because now we've got the have to on the table, really. Thanks, Jenny. And so the catapult, and yes, I think what hopefully was also clear in the session to be recorded live next week, but actually for most of you listening last week or before, is that it is actually the intention in the word as well. It is always the intention that will drive it, not the word itself. So if my intention is to tell you what you have to do, and I'll put a consequence there, which actually threatens you, or I threaten myself through a consequence, then it's coercive. And whereas if actually it is a desire, because I want to, and I would imagine you weren't forced to learn the languages, you actually did make a choice to learn the languages because you wanted to be understood, then it's a different starting position. So there you go, those listeners, this is one of those sort of things where we discuss words and the impact of them and the intention which drives it. And I think it always does go back to the intention, and maybe that's also what we're discussing here. What is actually my intention I choose to take in relation to other people?
Yes, and it's that ongoing practice of exploring that intention, of course. So we're here to explore how, why, how, and when to connect with the not like-minded. So who wants to open with some thoughts about that?
I'd probably like this. Sorry, Lou, were you about to? I'm interested in rethinking or thinking about why. Why would anyone choose to want to make a decision to connect with somebody at a moment when there is a not like-mindedness that I'm aware of?
I think for me, I do, I intentionally seek out opportunities to connect with people who are not like-minded, because if I only speak to people who are like-minded, then I stay in a bubble of like-mindedness, and I want things in the world to change, and so I want to expand my sphere of influence. And so that involves connecting with people who don't think the same way I do. That's my why.
Mm.
I would say I agree that that I also want to see a different world. And so I guess that's why for myself, I find it important to talk with people who are not like-minded, to really understand their positions, not necessarily to coerce them into the ways that I'm thinking, but to really see where they're coming from and to try and understand, because I think we're living in such polarized societies right now, more than I guess any of us have ever seen, or certainly that's the impression that I have. So for me, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's very easy to get stuck in our own echo chambers, especially the way that internet algorithms work and social media platforms algorithms work. It's all about directing content that we want to see and that we agree with. And so I think it can also be a process, if we're thinking about the online world, how to somehow get out of those echo chambers if it is something that we want to see. And so I guess I research often and see what people who have very different positions to me are writing about and thinking about, even though it can be also very frustrating, but just to somehow be aware of that. It's not something I manage to do perfectly all of the time, because it is kind of easy to get into, again, these echo chambers where I'm reading stuff that is progressing my knowledge in the direction that I'm interested in. And I think similarly, I don't know if it's just myself living in Berlin or what it is, but I find it actually quite difficult, or like not that frequent anyway, that I meet people that are that far differently minded to me. Although I would say also something good, I think, or at least helpful to keep in mind, is that even is to not maybe make assumptions about how like-minded people are, if it's just based on something, I don't know, aesthetic or contextual. Just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean they're necessarily going to agree with what I think, or vice versa. yeah, so maybe I don't have that many opportunities that I'm aware of, but through conversation, I guess that's a way of finding out how like-minded or not like-minded I am from another.
I think for me also there's a consideration that there is no moratorium on good ideas. And if one believes consistently that, you know, people talk endlessly about lifelong learning, and quite often it's referenced within the context of gaining another qualification or degree or whatever. Whereas in reality, for me, it seems that the lifelong learning is precisely what you pick up from someone who has a different perspective on a situation, on life itself, on a set of circumstances. And that's what I was thinking about when I first mentioned the idea of there being, for want of a better term, a spectrum of light. And I deliberately use light because I think that for me, it's about engaging with a continued journey towards a greater enlightenment. And that's what I get from engaging with someone whose perspective on the world, because they have a different lived experience, will be different from mine. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will persuade each other one way or the other. In many instances, that's not the point of the exercise.
Mm.
I think it's very context dependent. Like I moved around a lot when I was a kid, and so I was constantly in places that were different, and the culture in one place or one school would be very different to the culture in another. And so it didn't seem to me like there was a standardized anything, but it was a great deal later that I realized that I was quite different in that perspective, that a lot of other people, most other people at that stage in my life, had grown up in one place. And so what they knew around them was what was their norm, and they didn't even think that there might be a different way of being or doing or speaking somewhere else. And then growing up, getting to the age of 45 and discovering that I'm autistic, I suddenly realized that I thought that I was like-minded, but actually I didn't even know my own mind. And so that sort of fascination with observing all these other minds and all these other ways of being just became even more curious to me. And I mean, I spent 3 years living in a bus in Australia, working with Indigenous communities. And there are so many like-mindedness aspects of that experience for me, but it could never be my culture. And so I learned so much from that sense of the similarities that we shared, partly through our disconnection to the culture and society that we found ourselves in, that I can't understand how people would want to just stay in their own little bubble and not step out to see what other people think and do and say and are. It's that constant recharge of life to see how other people function for me.
I'd also like to respond to the question, which I've just, I think, clarified something or learned something in my thinking, listening to you all. Maybe because of also what you said, Fee, I've also moved around a lot as a child, a lot. I don't remember, it was my choice, and then I started making it my choice, and I've just come from a space of moving around quite a bit. And I realized that I found it always very easy to engage with anyone. Might have been very shy to start with, but I actually really like people. And what I've noticed is what happens when people are together and people can get on with each other. And so I realized there's a real utopian thing of when we get on well, then we can actually we can save the world. So and I've just made some notes is when I feel if we're part of something, then we have so much possibility together, and because we are part of one world. So I realized for me the why to engage with the not like-minded, which maybe we can also work out in a bit, what do we mean by that, is for that reason, is to connect people. And that doesn't mean that I like everything everybody says at all. But I've also noticed, working as a mediator for a long time in conflict and as a coach, I really do get to see the sort of the heart of the human in each person. I get to see the great, lovely, loving side, the vulnerable. And even if often what I might be briefed with, or what I know about that conflict, is someone really struggled with somebody, or really hates somebody, or had really different experiences. So I think by just seeing those nuggets in there has given, for me, I always believe there is something in there, however, whatever they present outside with their words and things. And yet I struggle to connect with people when they have really differing opinions. So both are going on. I'll come back to that.
Mariana, you should speak next, maybe because you didn't speak already, but I just wanted to very quickly interject, because I feel like what's become clear from what we've all said already is that I think establishing not like-minded or like-minded is already something that we can debinarize, because I think it's clear that there is actually no like-minded or not like-minded. It's just a mesh of complexities in which we may be aligned on some things and not on others, but there isn't this either or. Sorry, Mariana.
No, you actually kind of read some of my notes here. I was deconstructing this idea of the like-minded, no? Is that I like your mind, so you're different from me, and I like your mind, but my mind is not your mind. So, that I think and going back to this language as an access to other words. I don't need the word to be one unified thing. I deeply care for diversity. So I think it's extraordinary to think in sci-fi kind of conceptual thing. The idea to access the thing that I like, the like-minded, it's extraordinary. We don't have to live in the same world, you see? Because we can all be a world, a particulation of this thing we are agreeing to call reality. Huh? So the middle ground, the thing we consent to be, a middle ground. We can communicate, we can be there, we can go there, we can access this part. But at the same time, we can have our microcosm. So the thing is, I was listening to Fee and Rivka, and this being in other contexts, no, traveling and being is not the same being there as accessing, no. That's why I said I must learn the code. And the must is a push because I wanted to communicate. I wanted to access this world. I want to access your world. But at the same time, I want to make clear that I also have some codes, even though we're all speaking English. And you can access mine as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the middle ground is kind of it's a consensual land. It's a thing we all six call reality, and we can access through codes. Language, English is the code now, but there are also gestures. There are also a synthetic language, no? I mean, synthesized language or gestures, as my hands are doing now, or the context around us. So if I'm thinking about how can we actually learn to grab all the signs around, yeah, the rooms you are in as well, to not to read you and to have a kind of idealized perception of what each of us are, but as an extra. No? I think that when I approach a student with a thesis or whatever, I always ask, what kind of music do you like to hear? How much time do you travel by bus? Through where do you go? Because this helps me understand the codes that he or she or they have, no? Uh, and for me, this is it's very special to be invited to this hyper language or coding or whatever. I don't know if you relate to this.
I think one of the things that I'd like to pick up on is this the sort of underlying context that might be perceived from what we're saying, which is that somehow there's an impetus for a kind of homogeneity. And I do wonder sometimes whether that might not be exactly what it is that would persuade someone else not necessarily to engage with this. Because I think the sense of, to just pick up one of the expressions that you use, Rivka, about getting along, the kind of sense of that is that we are in agreement. And for me, I'm not sure that whilst I'm not drawn to the binary, nor am I necessarily drawn to the idea that we will all agree. Because for me, some of the most interesting developments come from recognizing that we don't all agree, and then determining how do we get to what you referred to, Mariana, as the middle ground, in order to move to our next state. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have suddenly come to this wonderful collusion of agreement and everything's this beautiful mishmash in the middle somewhere. That actually holding a differing view has its own place. And as Mariana just said, that you go to the middle ground in order to facilitate something. It doesn't mean that you have given up in order to be there. And for me, one of the issues is that I think causes the binary is the fear of having to give up. I can only get to be in the same place as you if I give up, if I surrender. And again, we come back to that whole sense of the power and hierarchy that is already invested in the habitual use of language. You come over to my side is the conversation that is subconsciously or unconsciously going on, rather than we will together find a new path. And that's where upwording attracts me, is that sense of not giving up, but together finding.
It's interesting to explore that in the context of the very personal, as opposed to the social, organizational, group dynamic. And I'm thinking about interpersonal interaction and consent in the context of an agreement between two people to proceed with something, whether, often it's sexual consent or it may be some other activity that you're planning to do with someone. That consent needs to be fully in place there, and you do need to ideally be in a place where whatever action you're doing together is something that you are both fully on board with, and if not, then that action needs to be adjusted to allow for the boundaries of the two individuals in this. So consent in itself is never as simple as yes means yes and no means no. There is a navigation and a negotiation where this person exists and this person exists, and they're going to do something that overlaps in the middle, without crossing each other's boundaries, without breaching a barrier. Is that place of agreement in the middle.
I'd say that that place of agreement in the middle can only come about when everybody is fully informed. And I think this is perhaps one of my own personal bugbears, but I'm pretty sure that it's shared. At the moment, we do, I believe that we don't all have the same knowledge, the same truths, facts, whatever you might want to call them, about the situation that we're in. In this country, I've been shouting quite a lot about Stockholm Syndrome, particularly since the last general election, because as soon as I saw the ex-mining families up in the north, up near here, Burnley and that, had voted Tory, I lost all sense of hope that we can ever actually change things, because we're so conditioned by the narrative that we've been sold, that capitalism is the most important thing, that profit is the only value that matters, that compliance with the rules will lead us to our future wealth and security. But any kind of stepping away from those rules, any kind of deviation from the norm is dangerous and a threat and must be stopped. If this is the language, if this is the narrative that people believe, which evidence says that they do, then my judgment of that situation is that those people have been sold untruths and haven't been given the opportunity to see the world through a different lens. And so that makes me want to place myself in their spaces so that I can try and show them that there is another way to be, to think, to do. There are other people that might be more valuable allies to them than the ones that surround them in those moments. And I recognize that that's, it's a demand on my part, it's a judgment on my part, even though my sense of it all is that I'm trying to help them, I'm trying to free them, I'm trying to give them a different path. It's still me saying my way is right and your way is wrong. And so there's a huge amount of complexity in everything that I feel about what's going on at the moment.
Can I add something? Oh.
No, go
Just a
ahead.
quick one, just from that maybe more bigger group people example, and relating to what you said before, Jenny, about the needing to have consent. And I've noticed that where the consent does happen, where consent can happen, is the moment the people involved choose to. So the need to is definitely there in the room. We need to have consent on this, or consent must be needed, or whichever way we want to. It's an idea. It remains an idea, maybe an ideal, maybe a rule that we would like to have in place or something. And it's the moment that actually that I want to find a way of having, or I give my consent. It is a choice at that moment. And I think, again, that would be the upwording bit. And if I can just, connect to Fi, it's alive at the moment. Within my family, there is a member who has a very different political choice of ideas currently. And there's a lot of what I also feel for a lack of information. And I notice every time in my intention, I want to help that person. I want to educate that person. I want to change that person. I want to make that person read stuff. I'm actually co-creating a brick wall. I'm hitting a brick wall. I'm definitely not getting consent. And what I've also, I think it was relating to, was it Lou, you said before, I have now invited myself, I've given myself consent, actually, interesting enough, to read the stuff that I really didn't want to read. I've gone quite far into reading all kinds of areas politically that are quite hard, and I found more connection to that family member. I've also found that now I'm approaching things to have a conversation, I'm taking more time. There is a waiting for that family member's agreement to have the conversation rather than me giving a lowdown. And we are finding, I'm liking that middle, we are finding a ground. We are finding a ground where we can hang out and we can really like each other and we still agree. But, you know, even so, with that kind of consensual conversation, I'm not taking a higher moralistic, higher ground. There's things shifting in our understanding of things. There's things expanding. So that's the really exciting bit as well. Thank you. So that was a few things.
There's something I'd like to pick up on, which brings it, again, connects to this taking it outside the wider kind of social context and bringing it right back down to the personal and individual, or certainly a smaller grouping. And one of the word I'd like to introduce is trust. And the reason for introducing that is with relation to the thing that you mentioned, Fee, about knowledge. Since no one holds all knowledge, the reality is that sometimes the imparting of knowledge alone isn't the requirement. It's about engaging with the intent. It's about engaging with an understanding of that other person's position, even if you don't have the knowledge to join them there. So what I mean about that, and that then brings me to this thing about whether it's necessarily always the middle ground. So tying, is it always necessarily the middle ground together with trust? I'll give an example. Way back whenever, a girlfriend of mine absolutely loved ballet. I knew nothing about it and wasn't necessarily particularly interested in finding out at that point. She did not like and had no interest in football, which at that point was central to my social existence. It wasn't for us to find a middle ground. We didn't seek to find football playing ballet artists or vice versa. We agreed with the idea that there was a trust implication here. And the trust was, you have found something really important in that thing, whatever that thing is. And I think you're important in my life. So I will make the journey across to where you are, trusting that there is something of worth there, otherwise you would not be engaged with it, and vice versa. I still am not the world's greatest ballet fan, but by making that journey, I got something from it. I actually quite like dance in general. And so I could find something. I quite like the idea of someone being so dedicated. And certainly when I engage with, as I did later on with a film that I was making with ballet artists, I suddenly realized that I used to think footballers were fit. I used to think footballers were fit till I engaged with ballet artists. And so for me, the journey wasn't about finding a middle ground. It was about saying, I trust your intent and where you are at. And I believe in you enough to act on that trust without necessarily having full knowledge. And I think the more we're prepared to engage with that, the less we might feel the need, for want of a better term, or a desire to educate that person. Maybe it's about educating ourselves. How do I get a better understanding of how you've arrived in that position that you currently hold? And then look at the incentivization that comes with waking up to or opening up another avenue. Because as Rivka said, people will come, the consent will come when the want is triggered. And for me, part of triggering the want is to offer something that that other person or group would find attractive.
I'm really
I'm wondering, oh, sorry, go on.
No, you can. I was just going to say, I'm glad that Charles brought up trust, because I was also thinking about this word when Jenny was first doing this kind of hand action about meeting in the middle with consent. It kind of occurred to me at that moment, and then also what you were saying, Fee, about not everyone having all of the knowledge, is that I was also kind of thinking about trust, because I think to already want to consent with somebody, there has to be, at least in my understanding, a certain level of trust in that other person to get to a place to want to engage with them on something, whether it's, well, whatever it is. So I think, like in your example, Charles, there was probably a level of trust because you were in a relationship with this person. And it's generally a bit easier, at least in my understanding, of trusting somebody that you have established a certain level of common ground with, that you already trust their judgment on certain things, or you appreciate certain elements about that person. And so there's a desire to want to see whatever it is, whether it's the ballet and the football, or whether it's a political position or anything else. So it's more curious to me, or like more, I guess, difficult to wrap my head around how to establish trust with people in which we don't see any similarities. How can we trust to consent on doing something before having established something? Okay, Mariana, maybe as an answer to that, or I don't know if Fee wants to go next.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a parenthesis here, like, because when Charles started to talk about trust, I thought the thing was gonna go somewhere, but it went another way. Because through your anecdote, there was nothing there. There were just simply two microcosms going parallel. So maybe they collide, maybe they don't. It's not necessary. It's not a requirement there. There's not trust there. Makes me question the thing about value and what we actually put value, like a very powerful moral kind of characteristic too, no? What do we really think is valuable from the other one? And what do we don't negotiate and we don't let in? I think it's that's a call for us as well as humans, as to say, what are my values and how am I putting this value that I have kind of in a very capitalist scale, no? This is good, this is bad, this is worth something very precious, opposite to yours, no? Being whatever we mentioned. Am I being clear? Not very much, no? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying this because I think the ultimate thing behind this is the question of value and vulnerability. What is really our intention in regards to relationships? How do we establish them? What do we expect from a brother, sister, partner? No, really, what do we really expect from them? And in any given situation, and are we putting our values on some other kind of market? So I don't know. I
get a real sense, Jenny, that in sort of curating this session, you've allowed yourself the option of being on the sides. I'd like to get a sense of what you're getting from this, or what your input to this might be.
I think, yeah, okay. I feel like I find myself a lot in situations where I'm an ally and I am caught in the middle of people who are not like-minded to one another, who are polarizing and who are shaming and blaming each other and going, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and often find myself in the middle of those places, looking for ways to build connection. And I will probably have a mind on one side or the other of that particular fence, perhaps, and want to encourage people in a particular direction, which is where my mind sits. And I found that upwording has really helped me, particularly in the written word and in social media keyboard wars. In those, right? Where instead of joining in the you're wrong and the name calling and the blaming and the shaming, offering some curiosity and some empathy and I want to understand why you've come to that opinion, and I want to explore that opinion and this other person's opinion and see where we can, that bit, and so yeah, that's the thing that I'm most curious about in this conversation, is how language is part of creating those cultural shifts. Rebecca.
Yes, and I think we started off somewhere at the beginning of this conversation with, I think, Charles, you were mentioning something about the polarized agree, disagree. One of the things I know we've been really doing, I've been doing, is to practice noticing how quickly, when I hear something, whether that is live from one person or group, a position or the TV, how quickly by habit I can jump into, oh yeah, I agree with that, and how quickly I might go into disagree. And it seems that it's only those two, at worst, it is those two. And then also sort of really recently realizing how much in language I have been, I'm really careful on the way I have, and I know other people have as well, been educated with take a position. Now you must take a stance, decide where you sit, don't be on the fence. I think the fence is the bit that we might sit off at, whatever. It's a real sort of, you've got to have a position. And the position generally you've got to have is on that extreme or that extreme. And I think Lou, you were saying at the beginning about us becoming more and more and more polarized. And I hear that it's very strongly there or there. And what it stops is any kind of multiple views, which is where you started off as well, Charles. And I think it is a case of practicing. I think noticing is one thing. And then how can I practice my mind just hearing a view? And possibly even going further and going, and is there more? And let's hear more views, and being excited and interested and curious about hearing lots and lots and lots of views before even going into, and that relates to what you were saying, Mariana, putting a value on it. This is a good view, this is a bad view, this is a dangerous view, this is a view that shouldn't be had, this is a view that's outdated, this is a, and very quickly labeling it. And it also comes, I remembered something else. A friend said, and it does have the word agree and disagree, and I'd invite you to hear it slightly differently. He says, there's no point having a meeting where everyone agrees. So I'm using the word agree, but it wasn't about vehemently, wasn't about agree, disagree. He's just saying, what's the point of having it? We can just inform each other by email. So the whole point of having a meeting was to have different opinions coming into the meeting, because when we have those, we learn. And our the current view or idea or whatever it is, project, is being challenged in the rigorous way, not challenged to go, it's a rubbish idea, where the value comes back in. And now I'm going to stop talking.
What I'd like to pick up on that is precisely the way that mirrors what I was saying about there being no moratorium on good ideas. And what I would gather that friend of yours was probably getting at was that sense of it is by disagreeing that you refine the idea for it to be its best. When I was in the sports department, we used to have this thing that we referred to, others soon also came to refer to as the post-mortem. It was called the post-mortem deliberate. It was post-show we would determine what had gone well with the show, what had been successful, what had been less so. And we were brutal with 3 or 4 quite simple rules about that brutality. And this is where we come to trust and intent again. It was about the product, not the person. So you could be as harsh as you wished, provided it was focused on the product, that being the item that was in the show or the show itself, and not the person who was responsible for that. The other was, there was no hierarchy. When we were in the postmortem, the head of department's voice was as relevant as the individual who had just joined. And the third was, you couldn't simply say that something was just shit. You could say that if you were going to demonstrate how to make it better, or you were going to present something to replace it. And interestingly, what that did was, quite often, as a result of that, the product that came out of that process, we would all then be entirely behind.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a really fundamental thing in so much of what people are saying, which is about absence of coercion and the presence of agency, and finding modes of communication that fully enable people's agency to want to rather than have to, must, need. So that curiosity is an encouragement of personal agency in getting through the difficult agree-disagree place. Rather than coerce, you're wrong, I'm right, you must agree with me, you must disagree, you know, those places.
And the third one, which seems to be on offer, is and we can agree to disagree. And then you go, okay, is this as far as we can go? And I think a lot is lost. I'm noticing that when I move away from agree, disagree, I'm really learning. And I think it is that value thing as well. As soon as I put a value judgment on it in a hierarchical way, it's good, it's bad, it's better, it's worse, then already I'm fighting for my idea, because my idea, of course, is better than your idea, or I'm fighting with someone because I want to support their idea. And so what we're doing is just standing still, having a battle between the ideas. So I think within language, because we are also here, very much on the, it really is that basis of that whole concept of right, wrong. As a whole concept to exist is the issue. That there is a right and wrong, therefore there is a good and bad, therefore there is a better and worse, and I know which one it is, and I know what is right and wrong. And I know, Charles, you're waiting, but I know you know also what's right and wrong. And Lou, you know you're right and wrong, and everybody knows they're right and wrong. And I'm really aware that everybody in the world has their own version of right and wrong, but my right and wrong is better than yours. And isn't that generally where somehow we might trap ourselves in?
It's a hierarchy,
isn't it? Just sorry, Charles.
What I was about to do wasn't specifically relating to right and wrong. Actually, it was about if I may play devil's advocate for a moment, is to disentangle value when we're using it within the context of judgmental. Mm-hmm. As you said, this is better than that, or this is the best. And values, which are about the fundamental things that matter to us, and the extent to which those values may indeed be the motivation for the positions we hold and our desire not to move from those positions. An example might be, I put as one of my values the importance of being honest. And somewhere in there, whilst it started out as a fundamental way of being, I end up attaching to it a position that then relates to hierarchy. So because being honest is one of the things I see as one of my values, I then determine that someone who does not necessarily marry to that is in some way, shape or form lesser. And how do we disentangle the values from valuing? Just thought I'd leave that there.
That's a very interesting point. That's really fascinating. I think it's really, I mean, that's what's great about this upwording practice, right? That it is a practice, that it's an ongoing thing, and that there is no fixed point to arrive at or place that anyone has to be. So it's great to to increase on that. What I wanted to also point out was bringing it back to this idea of trust, like what Rivka was saying, with agreeing to disagree. And it's something that I feel like with people that I very much trust, with my best friends and lovers and collaborators, etc., it's much easier to agree to disagree, because we already have so much that we feel we are like-minded on and that we support each other on. So when we come up against something in which we don't find a common ground, it's okay to kind of say, okay, we agree to disagree on this point. But when we're talking with strangers or people we don't know, when we come up against this point where we agree to disagree, and there's nothing else that we really see binding us in any way, it's kind of, at least for me, it seems that it would be easier to rather dismiss this person or choose not to engage with this person again or something like this. So I'm just wondering about this idea of agree to disagree in relation to trust and the not like-minded or less like-minded people.
I've been playing with an expression which is disagreeing successfully. Disagreeing successfully is the disagreement remains, but there is nonetheless an agreement to proceed.
Yeah.
In some way. That the disagreement is acknowledged and that we can move forward from here in some way, not go our separate ways and polarize, but move forward in parallel or whatever.
I have a thought I'd like to share, and that's quite specifically around words. I would wonder what would happen if we let go of the word altogether. I wonder what would happen if the word agree or disagree just left the vocabulary into the right recycle section. I'd also put success in there. Just because it comes with failure and it's such a strong impact on failing and being successful, and it's a lot of pressure, and it's again a very sort of opposite. There's a lot of things in between, and then we get the other ones, failing successfully, and I was just playing around with these things. But I'm just wondering what would happen if we had found other ways other than agree or disagree, because even if we don't want to go into that polarized one or other, the very fact that we have the word in there is not moving away from the polarized. So I think I've been playing around more with just hearing that current view or noticing my preferred position at this moment. And I'm noticing for me, when I go my preferred belief or position or current view, or I'm noticing this is what I'm thinking or what I'm attracted to or I'm finding safe with or more comfortable at this moment in relation to, it also opens up for me a position of being able to shift or change. And therefore I'm not holding on so much to what I said before. Well, this is how I think. I'm noticing that there's more ease, there's more porousness, there's more I can add on to. And I think that's back to that also, the trust. If I trust, I do sometimes really purposefully prepare myself on a good day, you know, when I have the energy to go, okay, I'm going to trust that I go into this meeting and that whatever somebody says, especially if I might be expecting something that isn't, I'm going to trust that there's something in there I may learn from, or I may learn from them. And I'll trust that they're saying, this one I'm more comfortable with. I trust that they're saying it for a really good reason. Whatever that person is bringing to the table is what they currently believe or feel important to add to. So there's something important there. I think that's where I'd probably separate the caring for the person. I may not like the idea. Yeah, I wonder about changing vocabulary really with quite a few of these.
I think going back to my disagree successfully, if I take those words away, it is about consent to proceed.
Say that again.
Consent to proceed.
Consent to proceed.
I wonder, and I have been wondering for these last few moments, what would be the impact if our starting point was not specifically related to where we are, or where I am, or where the individual is, and rather on where they would wish to be? So if we started with the focus, because what I was getting from listening to this was within nearly all of this, whether it be agree to proceed, as you just said, Jenny, that there is a determination or an intent or a wanting to get to a mutually beneficial outcome. And if perhaps the starting point was determining what that mutually beneficial outcome was going to be, rather than where the individual or individuals engaged currently are, whether that might provide more leeway for the give and take, the shift and move, in order to continue to proceed. And I was talking to some people on another session that I was doing a workshop, and I said that it's a little bit like if we were all in this place together and agreed that we were going to city X from where we are. Provided we knew we were going to city X, we could have those conversations about mode of transport, when, how quickly, because the focus was always going to be on getting to city X. And so each time that we came up on an agree disagree, we would find a means in order to progress in our ultimate intention, which is to get to city X. And I just wonder sometimes whether we bring too much of the I'm here. Right from the outset, I'm here. Since almost inevitably what will result from that is that the response is for that other individual, and I'm here. So now we've got I'm here and you're there, and already we've got the binary before we've even begun.
It's interesting. There's a consent training exercise I often use when I've worked with young people, training them on consent, where I challenge them to make a pizza together, and they have to write a list. That I invite them to write a list of what they want on their pizza, what they will have on their pizza, and what they won't have on their pizza. And they then have to find the common ground of things that is nobody's won't list. Nothing that's on anybody's won't list is going on the pizza. If they have a mutual wants, then great, those can go on the pizza, and the will haves are the area of negotiation. But the destination is a pizza that they can then eat together. And so, and it's quite interesting because what taking your example then, Charles, it's actually like saying let's make a pizza and having two people in a room going, well, I'm hungry, but the only thing I like is tomatoes, and I'm hungry. The only thing I like is cheese, and them arguing about that forever and kind of never getting to the pizza at all.
Yes.
I am conscious that we've been talking for around about an hour now. And our conversation's been really fascinating. Thank you all so much. I've learned a lot and have many thoughts to carry on pondering and continue this conversation, I'm sure, with some of you. Before we wind up, I wonder what each of you might have as a takeaway from this, and I invite anybody who's watching also to think what you're going to take away from this conversation, if anyone wants to offer one of those.
My takeaway is a pizza, please.
I take away how much I love these upwording experiences, because I spend the entire time going, oh, that makes me think of this and all of those things. And sometimes I butt in and I give my little spiel about whatever, but most of the time I just kind of note something down that I know I'm going to come back to and think about later. And sometimes the conversation circles all the way back to some of them, and I get the opportunity to dive in and splurge out on them. But they never fail in just leaving me really full of pizza. And I think it's worth saying that you know, we all work within a creative space here, and there's a real privilege to that perception that comes from being an artist, that you know, we vision, it's what we do, we create ideas of what could be, and we question what is. It's our role in life. And you know, there's an aspect of that in activism, you call it prefigurative intervention. If we can envision the world that we want to work towards, we have a better opportunity of actually being able to create it. And I think that that's something that not all non-artists, but you know, because we have this privilege as creators, we are very used to that idea of visioning. And I think a great deal of other people don't believe that they have that right to vision what could be. You know, it may be that their disadvantaged situation actually does prevent them from having that choice and that agency. It may be that they just never knew that they could, and so they look at artists and go, what audacity, how very dare they. But I just wanted to add that it's a real privilege to be able to have these conversations and to be able to share these tiny little details and the massive big scopes that they take us all through. So, you know, just huge gratitude to Rivka and Charles and all of you for all of these wonderful conversations and the fact that we get to continue doing them.
I have a takeaway as well. The pizza's done a lot, actually, you know, and the journey to the pizza just now. I'm taking away being reminded again, thank you, Charles, of the importance to, not so much the importance, the opportunity, the possibility that presents conversation and thinking when I think of or invite the other person into how would we like it to be, or where would we like to go, and still forgetting that, and then getting caught into my position, and then coming, also taking away how easily a conversation flows, as this one has done, when the agree disagree quietens, and it still offers opportunity to put something differing into space, which we have done a number of times without that being a challenge or scared of, or something that I hear that might be very different to what I thought, and then I'm going, oh, I'm quite attracted to that. And I think the possibility for desiring to move away from where I was to somewhere else is so much easier, because I don't have to defend my territory or position, so I'm taking that away. And I think that will probably, together finding, I really like that as well. There's a lot. I've just made a lot of notes. I'm taking away a lot from our conversation. I hope people are listening are also inspired to. And I think to respond to the original question as well is, can language make an impact? I think we've hopefully shown that different ways of using words, or maybe gentler with them, really does make an impact, and the intention will carry it all. Anyway, that's my takeaway. Anyone else for takeaways? Got a halo by now over my head, I've noticed.
I also wanted to thank everyone. It's really, as Fi says, is for me it's a very pleasant trigger. I also took some notes, and I think it's. I wanted to leave you with this idea that I've been pondering while listening to you just now, the space for uncertainty as well, because there's a ground there that we haven't explored, huh? Not the right, wrong, or middle ground, but what if, I don't know, how am I gonna, I'm gonna consent on something that I don't know. So where's the place to play with it and come to know, or just be in this uncertainty, no? So thank you. Thank you for the rest of my day reflecting on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mariana, for bringing up this point on uncertainty. It was also a word that was like flickering around in my head. So it's nice to see the like brain waves connecting throughout the conversation. And it's something that I've been kind of trying to put into practice quite a lot, is admitting to not knowing things, because I think there's so much social pressure, or at least perceived social pressure, to be knowledgeable about certain things, to either be up with the latest lingo, or yeah, to have read certain books or be knowledgeable. So it's something I've been trying to put into practice, is admitting uncertainty, admitting not knowing things, asking to be informed, or expressing whatever lacks or gaps in knowledge. Yeah, and another takeaway that I had was Charles and Jenny's pizza and City X examples. I think thinking about establishing what it is that would like to be agreed upon, or the mutuality between two people or two parties is ultimately a more interesting thing to think about. So I'm looking forward to putting that into practice in my own thoughts and conversations. Yeah, thank you everybody for having me.
Thank you.
I think for me, the first thing would be to say that I'm taking away from this a real sense of enjoyment, that actually being in this space, sharing, was enjoyable, challenging and enjoyable at the same time. As a very specific mindfulness thing for me is that one about how readily I and others, but in this instance, it's primarily about me, transmute values into valuing. And that's a real takeaway for me, to just, you know, step outside myself and engage with determining which of those is taking place. The other is the conversation about partly what Rivka said, the sense within this that introducing something different hasn't necessarily a connotation of rebuttal, and therefore it's easier to welcome. It's different, and it's been introduced along with what was already there, what I or someone else had already put in. Something else has been brought in, and there isn't a requirement for that to be seen only in the context of what's already there. It comes in its own right, and that's fine. And lastly, just to say, I'm leaving this energized and I was going to say fatigue. Fatigue isn't the right word. There's a kind of a disjuncture here that I know that sometime after this I'm going to go, whew, and yet at the same time I'm quite energized intellectually and emotionally by having been part of this. So thank you all. It's been a joy.
Well, thanks everybody. That's been such an amazing conversation. For anyone watching who wants to join this conversation or conversations like it, please, this is going to be broadcast on several platforms, and I will try to add the links to Upwording social media, and the ways to get involved if you do want to be part of this Upwording community and the conversations that we share. So have a look at the links attached to this, because it's a conversation that we all want to share out and encourage more people into. So thank you very much, all of you, Rivka and Lou and Fee and Mariana and Charles, for joining me today. And I'm going to stop the recording now. So bye.
And thank you.
Bye. Stop recording.